We all know that there's a bunch of questions surrounding the Chicago Bulls team ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Who's going? Who's staying? Why does the injury bug continue to hit the Chicago Bulls? So, in today's episode, I have 5 questions that the Chicago Bulls must answer ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Y'all know we're going to talk about it, break it all down, but you got to hear the music first.
Cognac, gang.
Shot Boys podcast with the Cognac Boys. I'm Cognac Boy Bobby, and I'm holding it down on today's daily episode. So if you're tuned in, like talking Bulls basketball, and you're trying to see red, even when they give you a headache, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But hey, we know the state of our Chicago Bulls. A lot of fun times, some downtime, sometimes more than just a little bit, and then we right back up. And now the injury bug strikes again, and the Chicago Bulls are currently on a 2-game losing streak, headed into a tough stretch as the season continues for the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, we know that this team has no championship aspirations right now, the way that we're currently constructed. And there's a number of questions for the Chicago Bulls that need to be answered. I know there's not a lot of trust that we can place into the front office, but I feel like it's time to have a discussion and just place out some questions that we hope as Bulls fans that we can get some answers to ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Right now, as it currently sits, the Chicago Bulls have a number of expiring contracts on their roster. They have a number of decisions that they have to make. So I thought it was going to be a good idea to put together 5 questions that the Chicago Bulls must answer ahead of the NBA trade deadline. The first question is, who should be considered untouchable for the Chicago Bulls? That's my biggest question. Who's considered untouchable for the Chicago Bulls? You know what I'm saying? We looking at, is it Montes, Giddey, Coby, Ayo, or is it just Montes and Josh Giddey? Those are questions that I have on my mind, because if the phone begins to ring at a rampant rate or even at a slow pace, who is considered untradeable? We know there's a number of teams that are looking into guys like Ayo Dosunmu and Coby White. We know we've seen a mock trade be placed out there surrounding Coby White. And we know there's a number of teams that are looking at Coby White, i.e. the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are looking for guard help. Do the Washington Wizards want to get involved with that as well? When it comes to Ayo Dosunmu, there's mock trades coming out saying that the Boston Celtics should look into Ayo Dosunmu for a little bit more help coming off the bench. So the Chicago Bulls, I feel like they need to approach this thing starting off with who should be considered untouchable in a way to where we are not only looking at, hey, we can finish this season on a high note, taking a look at some young players, or being hopeful that some of the draft assets that we could potentially gain by trading some of our players on these expiring contracts, or these young players who are looking for new contracts, who should be considered untouchable? If you asking me, I'm going to keep it a bing. It's only 2 people I will consider untouchable, with a honorable mention that could be added in as the third person. And those 2 people start off with Josh Giddey and Montes Buzelis. That third person I would throw in there, but if a deal comes across my table, I might, you know what I'm saying, might have to think about it a little longer. And that is Ayo Dosunmu, at least as it currently stands right now. That is not to say I don't want some more guys to stay, but consider untouchable. I'm going to leave it up to those 2, but I'm going to definitely think a little bit harder about keeping the Chicago kid Ayo Dosunmu in a Chicago Bulls uniform, because what he brings to the Chicago Bulls and what he is as a basketball player, and I believe he can contribute very, very effectively to a winning basketball team. The next question I have on my list is the deadline, the trade deadline, that is more about assets or players or both. What is the goal for this NBA trade deadline for your Chicago Bulls? Are you going to stick by what you've been saying since last year that you want players, young players with experience? Or is it more about drafting the right talent to this organization to not only see the Chicago Bulls be competitive, but to see the Chicago Bulls suddenly start to take steps forward to being a playoff team, to being considered to win the Eastern Conference, and then being conversations for an NBA championship? What is this trade deadline more about? Is it more about the assets? Do you want to stockpile up on draft picks like the Brooklyn Nets did last year and selected, I believe, 5 players in the first round? I'm not saying that the Chicago Bulls have to go that heavy into the draft assets, but what is the goal for this NBA trade deadline ahead of 2026 offseason, like the Chicago Bulls front office talked about during the 2025 offseason leading into this season? So what is it more about? You got to pick a lane. I think that you could do both and prioritize maybe a player or two here and there, but is it more about assets or is it more about players or a combination of both? And if it is a combination of both, how do you weigh that when you are trying to look ahead to building this team out properly? So that's what I got. What is the deadline more about? Assets or the players? My next question, it's the obvious question. What happens with Nikola Vucevic? It's the obvious question because we know that Nikola Vucevic is here. We know that he doesn't want to be here. I give him a little bit of credit for trying to be as professional as possible. I will give him a little bit of credit. But what is the end goal? Is the end goal to just hold on to him? Is the end goal to try to get as much as possible? What is plan B for Nikola Vucevic if nobody wants him or nobody is going to listen to you when you say, hey, just give us 2 second-round picks? And do you really think that Nikola Vucevic is worth a first-round pick? I think we know the answer to that. So when someone calls, is it more about, hey, let's just make sure we get the best offer for Nikola Vucevic? Or are you going to over-evaluate this whole entire situation and then trade deadline comes, he's still a Chicago Bull? And if the trade deadline comes, now do you flip to plan B or C and say, let's buy him out and allow him to go since he's been a quote-unquote professional for the Chicago Bulls? What is the next move after the plan A fails? Do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? Because I look at it in 3 different ways. You can go out there and plan A can be, let's get the most out of them. Let's just say for the sake of discussion, it is 2 second-round picks. Boom, plan A. Plan B, let's go out there and let's just see if we can flip them for a young, experienced player. Plan C, nobody wants him. Do you hang on to him? The Chicago Bulls have to answer for that, and they have to allow us to, they have to figure it out. They got to. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They have to come to terms with what Nikola Vucevic is and what can he potentially offer in a trade package or to another team. And will you play hardball to shoot yourself in the foot to where you retain this guy who doesn't fit the timeline of your young guys and who obviously is growing frustrated with being a part of the Chicago Bulls? Give you a little pat on the back for being a professional, but we know that it is time. Next question I have on my list is there a high risk, high reward trade in mind for the Chicago Bulls? What I mean by this is the Chicago Bulls looked into players with an injury history like Zion Williamson, like Anthony Davis. There's even some people throwing Trae Young out there to the Chicago Bulls. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know why, but is there a high risk, high reward trade in mind that you feel is necessary that can potentially fit your philosophy of young players with experience, minus the Anthony Davis trade, that you see is a high risk, high reward trade for your Chicago Bulls. Is it one out there? Is that the route that you want to go? Does that deter your plans of we're going to have flexible cap space that we can utilize in 2026? Or do you look at it in a different sense to say, hey, we know Anthony Davis down there in Dallas is not really feeling it, but a change of scenery and on a decent plan, we can get the best out of him. How do you weigh that? Is that even in your plans? Do you execute that? And if you do execute that type of trade, what will follow? High risk, high reward. Because though it can do wonders for you if you get an Anthony Davis, if you trade for a Zion Williamson, it can very well go to another way. You could still run into injury problems with these guys, or not necessarily having a guy fit with your squad if you go after a Trae Young, or these guys could just fall in love with Chicago, get distracted by the Chiracians, or how do you weigh that option when it comes to the Chicago Bulls and what's best for the team moving forward? And while we're talking about moving forward, my last question, my fifth and final question for the Chicago Bulls is just this simple. What do you want the future to look like? What do you want the future to look like? We gotta keep it real, y'all. What will the future look like after this trade deadline? Me personally, when I talk about any sport, football, basketball, those are my two sports I talk about the most, but I still look at baseball, hockey, whatever it is, whatever team sport is. I believe that if you are a GM or a decision maker in a front office that has to deal with cap space, trades, draft capital, etc., you have to have foresight of where your organization and where your team is heading. That's why you see a number of good teams with good front office say, hey, over the last few years, this player is declining. Maybe there's somebody out there that believes that they can just get the best out of this player, and we can take advantage of trading this player early and getting some draft capital. Those are the good front offices. But obviously, this front office is a little behind when it comes to let's move off this player early so we can get some additional draft capital and sell off this player at his or her peak. The Chicago Bulls been slow with that. What do you want your future to look like? Do you want to continuously get smoked in the play-in, or would you like to take a step back just to move forward a couple spaces? You look at the landscape of the Eastern Conference, and the Detroit Pistons, they right up there. Took a couple steps back just to move forward and put themselves at the top of the Eastern Conference. But it seems like the Chicago Bulls, they have a love marriage. They have a happy marriage with being a play-in team. Now, we don't know what the rest of the season is going to look like, but you can't fall in love with the 5-game winning streaks, with the 6-game winning streaks. You have to have some type of foresight, in my personal opinion, to say it's just not good enough. This is just not sustainable enough. I like this guy. I like this player. But this deal that comes across my table has me pausing for a second. And I have to think about it. And if it makes sense for both sides, but mostly for me, I have to strike on that deal. That's good GMing to me. Right now, there's no trust from Chicago Bulls fans in the front office. What do you want the future to look like? Do you want to continue to stay competitive, which is the ultimate goal? But do you want to stay competitive to just be a play-in team, win one game in the play-in, and then get sent home and ultimately miss out on the playoffs in totality? Or would you like to say, let's move off some of these players that we have on our team already and then move in to where we probably get some young players who may not be up to the level of some of the players that we have on our team, but can kind of fill the void a little bit. They're going to play hard, which is going to give us an opportunity to quote unquote stay competitive, but ultimately increase the chances of striking gold when the draft lottery comes around. So what will the future look like is what they have to come to the table and say, hey, what does re-signing Coby White look like for the Chicago Bulls now and for the duration of his contract? What does the situation look like for the Chicago Bulls if we re-sign Ayo Dosunmu for the now in the years that he's under contract? What does the situation for the Chicago Bulls look like if we do not move off some of these expiring contracts and the season is over and we're still in the play-in and then get smoked by Eric Spoelstra in the play-in? Those are the decisions that the Chicago Bulls have to make. Very tough decisions. But as of right now, as the YouTube GM, I like to call myself from time to time, guys got to move around. Because right now, at best, 7-8 seed, at best, and then you get in the playoffs and get smoked in the playoffs without giving yourself a legit chance and then messing up what you could potentially have in the future, sometimes it's okay to take 2 steps back to move 4 steps forward. Sometimes it is. So that's the last question the Chicago Bulls have to answer ahead of the NBA trade deadline. So those are the 5 questions, ladies and gentlemen. Who should be considered untouchable? Is the deadline more about assets, players, or a combination of both? What happens with Nikola Vucevic in any situation that you can't trade him, that you can trade him, or whatever? And 4th, high risk, high reward trade. Is that on your mind, the Chicago Bulls? And if that deal comes across your table, will you strike? And lastly, what do you want the future to look like? What will the future look like? Those are my 5 questions that the Chicago Bulls, in my mind, must answer ahead of the NBA trade deadline. That is it for me today, y'all. I appreciate y'all for tuning in to another episode. Drop down in the comment box some of the questions that you have for the Chicago Bulls, and let's chop it up on today's topic, man. But hey, I appreciate y'all. Thank y'all for always tuning in. Make sure you always see red. Y'all already know. I'm going to catch y'all on the next one for sure. Peace.
Cognac. Gang.